first trip to the Philippines, and I didn't know what to expect. And I spent 2 days wandering around, and I really enjoyed it. You have a great city here. I can't claim to know the whole country, but I wandered a bit around Manila. I sat in taxis quite a long time. I've had a wonderful time, so thank you. I'm going to talk. Let's see. Yes, here we are. I'm going to try to give you an overview of how I see the creative economy. I'm going to talk a little bit about what it is and when the idea started to get traction. And I'm going to try and chart the idea over the last 15, 20 years, because it's changed quite a lot in how we understand it. And then I've been asked to come up with some ideas that you might consider worth thinking about for the Philippines. Creativity itself is really difficult. So when I talk about it, I try and keep it, in the words I use, really simple. And I define it as simply as using ideas to have more ideas. It's that simple. We shouldn't be too complicated about it. It's done always by individuals, by people. And it occurred to me some years ago that the creative economy is the first economy to be based on people. Not based on land, not based on money, capital. You need capital, but it's not based on capital. It's not based on equipment. It's based on people, on individuals expressing themselves in ways that they find interesting and worthwhile and give them pleasure. At the heart of creativity is the thought that our ideas are worth having, that we are making some contribution to the world. That sounds rather grand, and it could be a very small contribution, but the benefit is there, and that's what drives a lot of people on to do something that is new and different, but also worthwhile, more beautiful, more elegant, could be faster, cheaper, more convenient. In some way, we are making the world a better place. And of course, it's very subjective, because what I think is beautiful, you may not. What I find interesting, you might find totally dull and uninteresting, not worth thinking about. This subjectivity is part of the power of creativity, and also one of the problems of creativity. And particularly when you start to set up policies for creativity and the creative economy, you're dealing with a lot of stuff that is subjective, intangible, and in some way the thinking process is invisible. The results are visible. We saw wonderful, magnificent results here, but the thinking process, the composition, the choreography, the thinking, how that is developed in someone's mind is invisible. And that's quite tough. So that's creativity. The creative economy, creativity is what we all do, and I'll come back to this later on, but it's widespread, it's part of the human condition. Creative economy is a relatively small part of that, and it's where we decide to turn our ideas into a product, a good or a service, put a price tag on it, put it out there in the market, and sell it. And in the last 15, 20 years or so, I guess, we used to measure this, we used to count this, we've now stopped counting, because almost every major economy in the world has made a big commitment to the creative economy. High-level commitment, at the level of the head of state or the head of the government, made a really high-level commitment to the creative economy. And the number of cities and districts and neighborhoods and counties and provinces and regions that have declared their support for the creative economy is in their thousands. I'm not talking about UNESCO's title, which is a very special, specific title, has to be earned and fought for. But for a district to say, we are ourselves, on our own account, making a commitment, that is now something that is, as we say, in the air. It's what people do. I come from the UK, which made a major initiative about this 19 years ago. And this is the size of the creative economy in the UK. It's about 90 billion. Sorry, creative industries. This is a list of specific industries that are described as being creative. The government compiled the list, and many countries followed this. Made their little changes, but followed the principle of saying there's a list of specific industries that are creative. I'm going to talk a bit about this later on, because we are beginning now to have questions about this principle. But the list of creative industries is now turning over about 90 billion. In the UK, we use something called value added. It's pretty close to GDP. It's statistically slightly more accurate, gives a slightly more accurate picture. Makes international comparisons quite difficult. But that's the size of our output of the creative industry. We also use the phrase creative economy to describe creative businesses, creative money-making, which is not in those specific industries, but is in the rest of the economy. And that's about 1.5 times the size. I'm going to come back to these figures later on. This is the government chart showing the main sectors, the main creative industries. America, much, much bigger, of course, about 700 billion. Now, that's the sort of static picture as we are today. When did this start? Creativity, of course, started when probably we became aware of ourselves, aware of our bodies, aware of ourselves, and we started to decorate where we lived. We started to decorate our skin, our hair, our teeth. We made jewelry, ornamentation. Let's say 30,000 years ago. Creativity is, and I will say this again and again, part of the human condition. The potential is there in every human. The money-making side probably started about 400 or 500 years ago in Europe. Some of the artists in the Renaissance became very rich people. Shakespeare died a millionaire. And I like this quote by a man called Daniel Defoe, who was an author and a businessman, a very active businessman. He kept on setting up companies, most of them were not very successful. But he said, writing has become a very considerable, very substantial branch of the English economy. He said that, interestingly, about 15 years after England launched the world's first Copyright Act. So copyright was a major factor in him being able to stay there. And then the search for excuse me, a name for all this really started after the Second World War. Fritz Matzluch was a man that I came across a long time ago. He was the first man to count up the role of knowledge in the US economy. And he showed it was over 50%. So he coined this phrase, the knowledge economy. Information economy, knowledge economy, post-industrial society. Daniel Bell, not quite sure what was happening, but knowing something was happening, couldn't put a name to it. And then Don Tapscott and others, digital economy. We've had entertainment economy, attention economy, and so on. And the creative economy really started in the 1890s. What happened then? I think what happened then was creativity started to become a mass movement. Whereas before that, artists and designers and inventors were operating in small groups on the margin of the economy and the margin of society. They began to be recognized as part of the mainstream. They began to come center stage. Creative people, particularly in film and television, which is my own business, and in music and publishing, began to get much more commercial. Every business started to rely much more on creative inputs to add value to what they were doing, through design, brand, logo, advertising, adding style, using design in all sorts of ways to add value to what they were doing. And the consumer was much more willing to pay money for novelty, for design, and for style. And in 1997, the British government made the creative economy a key plank of their industrial strategy. The Prime Minister declared creativity to be a source of wealth. They collected data on it, and they made it a national strategy. And of course, at the same time, from the mid-90s onwards, I suppose, really, digital and then online digital started to change almost every industry, every sector. In the way that people generated content, the formats they used, the pricing, the relationship between the owner of the content and the audience, the consumer, the user, and distribution. So where are we now? After 50 years of thinking about how we use knowledge and information in a hyper-network society with tremendous premium value put on novelty and style and brand in a very interconnected world. What is the role of creativity and innovation? And I was then paraphrasing a brief I was given about 10 years ago now by the Chinese government. I do a lot of work in China. I have an office in Shanghai. And they wanted to reform the curriculum for teenagers to make sure they were fit for the future economy of the world. They wanted to make sure the curriculum educated and trained teenagers. So they came to a group of 7 universities, and my company was one of those. And they asked us to paint a picture of the world. And I was asked to paint a picture of the creative economy. And I sat down in my office in Shanghai, and I thought, this is easy, I can do this. And I started to write and realized that some of my ideas had changed. I wrote a rather unexpected piece. We went to Beijing to present it to the Minister of Education in the State Council. And a friend of mine, a party official, came to me and said, John, I don't understand this creative economy. I don't get it. It's all very vague. Just sum it up in a few words. And I summed it up in a few words, spontaneously. And I'm not going to expand on what I said, because those 3 words, which became 3 principles, now sum up, to me, what I think the creative economy is. My ideas have not changed in the past 10 years. If anything, they become very much confirmed. In fact, my ideas went down well in Beijing. The next week, I went to Hong Kong and made a presentation to my old company, HBO Sports Merchandising. And they thought, that's very interesting. I'm going to take these ideas back to Los Angeles. So if I got approval from the party in Beijing and HBO Merchandising, I thought, I'm onto something here. Creative ecology, 3 principles. The first principle is the principle of what I call universality, and it's the principle that I referred to slightly at the beginning, which is that everybody is born creative. Every child is born with an aptitude, the mental faculty, to look around the world, to compare what they see with what they know, their memory, and in a sometimes semi-conscious, sometimes conscious way, to come up with ways that they think would make them more comfortable or happier. And we know this by looking at babies, because this starts at birth. Children love to play. They love stories, they love narratives. Even they know it's a story, they want it again and again. They love dressing up. They love painting and drawing on anything, themselves, the walls, the tables. They will invent imaginary friends that are as important as the real friends, sometimes more important. They'll invest objects, their toys, with enormous symbolic expressive value. And there's some evidence, and it's not a particularly cheerful fact, but there's some evidence that peak creativity is about the age of 3 or 4. And the reason for that is, if you think about it, is that at the age 3 or 4 or 5, you go to school. And of course, at school, you learn how to behave, and you sit in rows, and you have to basically be like everybody else. And you're given rules that you have to follow, all for very good reasons. So your creativity is constrained. And for some people, it's then gone forever. The tagline there is that being creative is normal. Not something that is a special gift given to a few people. Now, I'm not saying every child obviously is going to become a best-selling author or a brilliant designer. That requires a lot of hard work and a lot of training and a passionate desire. But the raw material of creativity is genetically hardwired in each of us. Now, all this is happening inside the mind, very internal, and it's private. Creativity is a private activity. But we do want to bring it out. We want to bring it out and share it. We want to bring it out and talk about it. We want to share other people's creativity. So the second principle is that creativity needs freedom. Freedom, it's like freedom of expression, it's like freedom of the press, but it's a more active relationship. It's being free to manage our relationship to ideas. And To say yes, to say no, to say, well, I like bits of it, and I'll change that bit, and I'll call it something. The ability to define what you've done, to define your idea, give it a name, give it a meaning, is a critical, if you like, a skill in the creative economy. The people who are articulate and able to define what they're doing and to say what it is are in a position of great power. And then the third principle is you need a particular kind of freedom. You need freedom expressed in markets. You need the freedom to take your product to market, to put a price tag on it, to tell people about it. You need markets that are open, therefore accessible, transparent, and fair. The core sectors, which are related to the nominated sectors, art, design, entertainment, media, and innovation. But food in Southeast Asia is really important. The Americans have a working group on creativity and the Coast Guard service. And in China, a very senior government official, Li Wei, a good friend of mine and a specialist on creative economy, and he launched a committee. He was deputy chair of the People's Consultative Council, and he launched a special project on creativity and agriculture. So that's where we are. And very soon I'm going to come up with some ideas about how we might become good at all this. But before I do this, I want to say two things about what it's like to work in the creative economy, because there's a thought that I often come across that compared to farming, agriculture, mining, manufacturing, logistics, assembly, the art and culture, creative industries are a bit flaky, not a real job. You're having fun, aren't you? So, you know, it's not real business. It's not real business. It's still a little bit marginal, a little bit optional, Quite nice, but we don't it's not real business. I think in many ways, actually, the opposite is true. I think being a successful creative entrepreneur is at least as tough as running a manufacturing plant, and is more competitive. And one of the reasons it's more competitive, and you're facing more risk, is that it's what I call the personal risk. Being creative is a lonely job, and there's always the fear of failure. I write up there that creative economy is an economy of failure, and normally when I mention that, the room goes very quiet, but the reality is we fail more often than we succeed. That's the reality. With farming, you generally succeed. Manufacturing, if you're sensible and cautious and you discuss it and you prototype it, you'll probably succeed. Creativity, you're always searching for novelty. Your judgments are subjective. And if my ideas are felt to be bad, it's me, John, that's failed. Because it's my idea. And I get the praise if people like the idea, and I get the blame if they don't. It's tough, in other words. It's very tough. It's individually much tougher. And then there's the business risk that we're dealing with assets that are intangible, and as I said, invisible. It's very hard to predict the success of something upon whose value the judgments are subjective. It's really hard. So I think it's at least as tough, if not tougher. I have what I call the two judges that watch every move I make. The first is a judge who says, John, is this the best you can do? Surely you can do better than this. All the time. If you're trying to be creative, you're trying to come up with a new idea that is not only attractive to yourself, but you hope will be, pleasing or beautiful. There's no yes, no answer. You've just got to try and do it, and it's never ending. And the judge is saying, is this the best you can do? Surely, if you try a bit harder, you can do a bit better. And the second judge is saying, well, it may be the best you can do, not very good, but we'll live with it for the time being. Does the market want it? And that's tough, because you don't know. I was a director of a film company for a long time, and we had a lot of, we were Britain's biggest film company. We had a lot of scripts come in, and we had to look at the script and make a judgment about whether we should invest any money in it. And turn that into what we would call a project, which had the elements attached, the writer, the director, the cast, the budget. And we would go out and raise 50, 60 million sterling. Basically on the script and the director and the cast. And we did that on the basis of what we thought the market wanted. And I think we should always keep in mind, when I said the creative economy is the only economy, the first economy to be based on people, these are the people. It's not an easy job. So how? I was asked to come up with some proposals about how the Philippines should develop its creative economy, and I feel I have to say, as I'm sure you are fully aware, really unqualified to do this. Because I know a bit about creativity, and I know how it works in many countries, but I do not know your country. So please forgive me. I'm an outsider here. I'm going to group them in the three categories of universality, freedom, and market. The countries that have succeeded in energizing and growing their creative economy are ones where the leadership of the government has given a very strong statement in its favor. Either the head of government or the head of state. And not just once, but many times. The UK commitment to the creative economy was made in a series of speeches and actions. When Tony Blair won the election, became Prime Minister in 1997, and he appointed Chris Smith, who was a PhD and a very respected cultural expert, as the Minister of Culture. And Tony Blair and Chris Smith, from 1998 onwards, worked tirelessly to say the creative economy was really important to the future of the country. And at the time, we thought that would be of great interest to artists and designers and people in the creative economy, and it was. They liked that. They thought, that's great. About time too. What took you so long? But actually, with hindsight now, there were at least two other benefits that were just as important. A friend of mine called John Howkins, who was the what we call the special advisor to Chris Smith, told me that in his view, the initiative made by Tony Blair and Chris Smith had the greatest impact on government, on other sections of government. Every other government department, from the Treasury, Education, Foreign Office, thought, we've got to change direction. We've got to include the creative economy in everything we do. All the government agencies felt that. And in John's view, that was the major impact. I think there was another impact that I've come across, which was on the parents and young children, because in the 1980s and the 1990s, early 90s, if someone had said, a young person at university or school had said, I want to be a designer, I want to go work in fashion, the parents would have said, shut up, go and get a proper job. But with the government saying the creative economy was the future, the parents felt, wow, that's rather exciting. Good luck. How can we help? And there was a shift, which was really important, and encouraged people to go work in the creative industries that would not have done so 10 years earlier. So the action there is not only the declaration that the creative economy, the creativity and innovation, I include them together, are important for the country, but a sustained effort at a high level, again and again and again, getting the concepts over to everybody in the country. Education is a topic that is hard to avoid. There's a very strong correlation between the levels of education and the size and success of the creative economy. Generally speaking, people in the creative economy have a higher level of education, and they earn more as well. And so you can map it in countries around the world where there's a higher level of education, you get a bigger and stronger creative economy. And what's interesting about this is that it's not only on the supply side. Yes, the people who have gone to full length of schooling and college and university will be more inclined to use their brains in their work. They've been using their brains at school. They've been using their brains at university. They want to go on using their brains. They want to go on questioning. They want to go on using their own imagination. So they want to go work in the creative industry. But also on the demand side, which is equally important, they want to buy the stuff. There's no point just making the stuff, you've got to buy the stuff. And you find that people who have had more education and have gone to university or college, they're more inclined to buy the products. They're really important, the product as well. There's a rather nice quote I had there from McKinsey, the American management consultancy, which does an annual survey of the number of jobs that require what they call tacit knowledge, which is the worker's ability, the freedom to look at something and, if they think it could be better, to make it better without reporting upstairs to their boss. And of new jobs, it's now 70% in Europe and America. In other words, if you don't have this ability, it's going to be tough. It's going to be hard to get a job. And the action there is to, as much as you can, to get people in school, to keep them in school, keep them in school for as long as you can, and also to extend the specialist colleges in design, film, fashion, those areas as well. Really important. When I was preparing for my visit, I came across your kindergarten education law, which I think was in 2012. And I came across this phrase, young learners should be encouraged to create and discover to become willing risk takers. And I think we're talking here people who are age 4 and 5. And I thought that's a really interesting principle. But why should 5-year-olds have all the fun? I thought this is a great principle for all education. You've got it for your 5-year-olds. I think it's 5-year-olds. But I think it should be a guiding principle for people before kindergarten, post-kindergarten, and indeed all education. Learners, I like the word, should be encouraged to create and discover. And if they have to take a risk in doing so. I've talked about education, I now want to talk about learning. And I'm going to characterize them by saying that education is what the government does, what the government provides. For a set number of years, it's compulsory, and then when you leave school or you leave university, you sort of never go back. You've done it. You've done it. You've passed exams, you have a party, you've done it. Learning is something that starts when you're born, if you're lucky, most of us are. It should continue through education. It's voluntary, and it can be continuous. And I have noticed a very clear correlation between artists and creative people and their curiosity. And if people stop being curious, stop learning, they stop being creative. The creative artist cannot stop learning. The creative artist who stops learning dies as an artist. Learning is an essential, critical part of the process. And it seems to me that in the creative economy, and indeed in a creative society, that learning is sort of more important than education. You know, learning that I decide to do, and because I want to, and I'm in control of it. That's more important. And of course, a good school should help me to learn. And actually, a good school should teach me to learn. Not just give me facts that I then repeat, but teach me to learn. There was a great man called Suchka Moka, who was Indonesian, and he was a journalist and politician and educationist, and he was a great man. And when Indonesia became independent, his ambition was to put the priority for development on education. And he wanted to get all the international agencies, the World Bank and so on and so forth, the regional banks, not to fund infrastructure, but to help the people to help themselves through education. And he said, if we get an educated, learning population, then we can pay for our own bridges and our roads. management. Now, I know at the moment the Philippines is about to embark on a massive infrastructure series of projects, and that's great. I'm not going to say that's not a good idea. But don't forget what one could call human infrastructure, without which the rest will not work. And Sutke Moke came up with this phrase, learning capacity, which he applied to the nation, to the newly independent nation of Indonesia, and which I apply to every kind of social organization. The city, what is Manila's learning capacity? The districts, the companies, and ultimately, of course, because this is what I've been saying, to me, what is my learning capacity? Am I exercising it? Could I possibly increase it? And I think it would be a worthwhile thing to consider having a look at the Philippines' learning capacity. I'm doing some teaching at a management school, the Drucker Management School in Los Angeles at the moment. And we are sort of revisiting, revising, changing the curriculum, because managing talent is managing talented people is different from managing a normal enterprise or a normal production process. I've written down some of the things there. On the finance, I've written down putting your creative assets, your intangible assets on the balance sheet. I know the Philippines has made some progress on this, but it's mainly in the field of software. And whenever you make something, whether it's a design or a film or a fashion, you need to capitalize it in a way that makes sense and investors can understand and rely upon. And I'm just saying there that it would be interesting to talk to your management colleges and your business colleges to see what they are doing about the creative economy. Copyright. Fundamental. It's the way we own and control our assets. And I'm including patents and trademarks, design rights as well. And I have two actions there, two proposals. One is to set up in Manila an advisory service to advise on intellectual property for free. Now that might seem rather generous, but I've got a model. I won't go into it here. Anybody wants to talk about it afterwards, very happy to talk about it. We did it in London, works very well. Sydney's done it. Denver's done it in America. It's a very good model. It's completely robust. You can organize it so you can get lawyers to give you free advice. It does work, I assure you. And it's a wonderful, wonderful service. A lot of creative people cannot afford commercial lawyers. The other thing I put up there is a digital copyright exchange hub, which we are developing in the UK, and I've just been working with some universities in China and some copyright centers in China to do a Chinese version of that, which is being supported by the online services in China. I'm going to finish with retail, and I'm doing it partly because retailing and pricing is very seldom talked about when we talk about the creative industry. It's all about production. It's all about work being made. How can we get more work made? It's all about it's all about supply. And I'm talking not only about industries, I'm talking about the economy. And economies consist of buying and selling. All economies. And Drucker, the great Peter Drucker said there, and I think he's so right, a company only really has two functions. Innovation, what are you doing that's different and the customer might be interested in, and then selling it. And we should never forget that. When we're setting up a creative business, creative organization, the creativity, the innovation is why we're doing it, but selling it is equally important. And finally, here are 4 principles that I have for the creative ecology. Change and diversity, learning and adaptation. And if whatever you do increases that, it's probably a good thing. And if what you're doing prevents that or constrains that, probably bad. We need change, we need diversity. We need to learn how to do things better. And then, having learned, we need to adapt our ideas or adapt our behavior. It's a continual process, learning and adaptation, learning and adaptation. In the creative economy, it's endless. And I'm going to end with a quote by Walt Disney, who is probably the most successful creative entrepreneur the world's ever seen. He was a very clever illustrator, inventor, businessman. Not a particularly nice man, I have to say. But he invented a company that is still today probably the world's best known brand for entertainment. And he said the future is not already out there waiting for us to discover it. It's not in a report, it's not something we can get ready-made. The future is to be created by us. First in the mind, very privately, and then in the action. First in the mind, and then in the action. And I think that statement by a man like Disney is a great motto, if you like, for the creative economy. Thank you very much.